Feroz, CTO and Head of Solution Sales, has been part of the First Tech Exco for the last 5 years. He's responsible for strategic selling and alignment with key partners. But really what came through from Feroz's side is his focus on the customer and understanding what the customer wants and getting there through a happy team and an engaged team. Jacques, he's been in solution design and solution engineering for the last 15 years and is probably one of the most personable people in our IT space and has been very gentle with educating me about what our subject is, which is data center as a service, and why Dell sees it as such an important place to be. What we're going to do today for our TechCentral visitors, our regulars, is we're actually going to let Jacques and Feroz take us on a journey of what this partnership means and what data center as a service is, and then we'll go into our Q&A.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you very much for everyone joining today's session. My name is Jacques Watermeyer, Solution Specialist from Dell Technologies, and in the session today, we're going to discuss application infrastructure strategies for modern application success and highlight how the data center as a service can assist businesses out there in their digital transformation strategy. Application data creates a digital presence today for all organizations. We've experienced all in a one generation shift on how applications are developed and delivered. We've all heard the term cloud is no longer a destination, but an operating model. But what does that exactly does, right? And what does the operating model mean? It basically is a set of behaviors that our customers like about the cloud experience and what we like as a cloud experience. Things like simplification of IT, the access to instant capacity, modern commerce, and easy to use development tools. However, as we see the transformation happening and we embrace multiple platforms for specific workloads, those expectations generally shift with them. And we are now expecting a cloudy experience everywhere, not just in public cloud, but additionally, as the world becomes increasingly multi-cloud, we want to see multi-cloud to work together better, right? So furthermore, we are also looking to simplify operations across multiple cloud workloads, especially in different data centers, edge locations, etc. And we see that these workloads evolve and the expectations evolve as we move across these multiple clouds as we are experiencing today. So ultimately, the fact that customers are looking for innovation everywhere and in the public cloud and in specific data centers, the debate is over of, you know what, the future is not just public cloud or just private cloud. It's basically a combination of both, right? So let's delve into a bit of the percentages that we do see and some of the challenges that does come up when we start engaging with let's lift and shift and put everything in public cloud, for example, right? We see cloud sprawl that leads up to complexity. And it's not a bad thing. It's just the pace that we are moving at today is we need it on like now. But what does that mean? 93% of customers deploy workloads across 2 or more clouds. Just personally, from my perspective and working for Dell Technologies, we use in the region of about 8 clouds, and it forms part of our operating model. But what we have seen the complexity leads to, if you don't have that operating model correct, it spirals into complex workload migrations, operational silos, inconsistent SLAs, etc., etc. And this is really where we see the benefit of the data center as a service come into play. So innovation needs to occur in private and public. There's no two ways about it, right? It stays in the entire stack. It needs to keep the focus on your service, storage, and networking. And for both traditional and on-cloud native applications, we want to keep that flexibility going. Deployment and consumption models are in the front line here. So let's have a look at public cloud use. Businesses use public cloud generally for bargaining, and it's for a good reason. The benefits are undeniable. There are increasingly a lot of agility and self-service provisioning from a resource perspective that's created. IT operations are simplified through offloading and automating management functions, and innovation can be accelerated by leveraging cloud services to help increase development of specific applications. But still, there are certain workload requirement that causes organizations to continue to invest on their own on-prem infrastructure. And let's take this example, right? It's all about that data gravity. Where does my application reside? When I move it, let's say, for example, a big database application into the cloud, how quick and what's the experience that users or my customers are experiencing today? So how do we also typically take that same control that we want for those respective workloads and performances to be right off on the bat? So as expected, when requirements keeps on growing from a keep data on-prem or move data off-prem into the cloud, there's a fair balance that needs to be maintained. And this is really where we see data center as a service play a big, big role. So yet, on-premise infrastructure, data gravity keeps workloads currently on-prem. It's easy, user experience is great, but how do we merge that? Because public cloud is not wrong, private cloud is not wrong, it's the combination of that. And how do we get the management of all those to work really well together? So if you could bring public cloud benefits into your on-premise workloads, how would that really resonate with you? And I think for a lot of folk out there, companies out there, it removes the complexity that currently exists in their organizations. They want that one button, switch on, let it provision, etc. And that is basically the message that we are bringing across here today. So removing these complexities is exactly what the data center as a service offering provides to customers. It brings that simplicity of public cloud and workloads to the existing data centers. And if that's even core or on the edge, specifically when you provision an on-prem workloads, you can now enjoy the local speeds and flexibilities that once was only possible when deployed to public cloud. You can now do this by retaining the security and control that you need to deploy on-prem and into public cloud through a single pane of glass. Let's have a look on, building it out a bit more. So Dell Technologies Cloud Data Center as a Service is unparalleled, bringing the consistency between on-prem and the public cloud environments. And no matter how many different clouds you may be invested in, we work with a lot of those public providers to bring the simplicity back into your own hand. So let's delve into and put a bit of focus onto some of the advantages that we'll look into, right? It's the increased agility. We want to mitigate the risk from on-prem advantages, for example. So what I've done is I've listed some of the cloud advantages, and there's many more to be listed, but I consolidated those and on-prem advantages. And I think when you bring those two together, I think you've got a good mix for your on-prem workloads. So let's have a look at the detail around it. With VMware Cloud on Dell Technology as data center as a service, this is specifically a cloud infrastructure installed on-premise, literally in your own data center, right? And it's easy to consume and utilize as a cloud service. The simplicity of the service is evident, and as soon as you place your online order, this is where infrastructure is then delivered, installed, and maintained, and supported by Dell Technologies or a approved partner. So this is where your IT operations, as we've seen in the previous slides, can offload the burden of dealing with infrastructure, instead focus their primary focus on value-added services. Furthermore, the consistency created between your public cloud and on-premise environments will both streamline operations and accelerate innovation. One example of this consistent experience is how you can utilize VMware's familiar hybrid control plane to provision and monitor resources, as you already do with your public workloads. And then finally, the peace of mind that's provided by combined offering from Dell and VMware, engineered solution, right? That is not just one trusted, but it's also a proven enterprise solution that provides the foundation on the respective technology. So in summary, VMware Cloud Foundation or Cloud, on Dell EMC combines really the speed and flexibility of public cloud with the security and control of an on-premise infrastructure by providing that, simplicity, the consistency, and then also the peace of mind that empowers the organization to deliver that business innovation and differentiation.
Mm.
So now that you know what the VMware Cloud on Dell EMC does, let's explain high level how it works. So I'm going to build out this so that we can just have a look at that. So first, after you sign into your VMware Cloud Services account to create an order, Dell Technologies will deliver and install your new cloud infrastructure in your core or edge data center location. Next, the system will be self-configured and registered with VMware Cloud Servers, so you can immediately begin your provisioning and managing workloads with VMware Hybrid Cloud Control Plane. And remember, going forward, the hardware and software is then fully managed, just like all in your public cloud resources. No longer will you need to worry about, the patches, specifically upgrades or routine hardware maintenance. Also, you should have any questions about those specific VMs in the software-defined data center. You are generally covered because you know exactly where those workloads reside and on what infrastructure. So we all don't necessarily worry about making sure is our Office 365 constantly online, being backed up, available, etc. Although some of those checks and balances happen in the background, we have got that ease of mind. Now with this solution, exactly the same. Your data is closer to you. Some of your workloads may reside in public, some on private, but you've got that flexibility and peace of mind. So just to highlight what's also new in the latest release of the specific cloud and data center as they're offering from Dell Technologies, all the regulatory compliance and certification is there. We see a lot of developers utilizing Kubernetes, Docker, etc. From a VMware perspective, we bring the Tanzu Kubernetes grid verification inside the stack, so it's available to developers locally, so you've got that same experience across the stack. New nodes for advanced workloads are isolated and can be provisioned for specific workloads. And then, we can work on multiple clusters per rack to isolate resources. We see a lot of businesses work with different sets of data, for example, and how do we isolate those workloads specifically? And then making sure that we can migrate those workloads in and from those respective sets. So I'm going to flip through the next couple of slides. It's just to highlight what compliance and certification we as Dell Technologies with VMware tag on these technology sets, and then also making sure that we stay certified, because a lot of the time you sign up to a public client or hyperscaler, you might be not thinking, well, are they compliant? But they are compliant and they get their certification forward. When customers place these data centers as a service on their premise, they want to know, am I compliant? Can I offer this as a service? How secure is those workloads, etc. These certifications are all validated and approved by Dell Technologies.
Jacques, can you pause there? Willem Hammond has asked quite an interesting question, which I don't want to lose. And the question is there a peer-to-peer connection between the end user and the actual data to be accessed and or updated with no one else on the same line?
So all of this is built on a software-defined data center. So you, in consultation with Dell and Dell Technology partners, there's a direct setup with the security that's set up to access those respective workloads in the back end. So there won't be necessarily a peer-to-peer in that sense. It will be managed through a software-defined interface from a firewall perspective and also tapping back into the respective workloads. If the set is to offer a service from the platform, there's a consultative way how we would best apply best practice for that respective workloads to be presented to those respective customers.
Then Ilza followed hot on the heels. Ilza de Kock, thanks for your question, which is obviously there's a certification missing there, which is POPIA compliance. Is that also coming in, Jacques?
So locally in the SA content, we will probably see that do come. From an international perspective, GDPR, we are seeing that leading the policy sets. And although we as South Africans and looking after POPI, that will tend to be an approved one to join the list specifically locally, but generally we internationally follow the GDPR rule sets. It's a bit more stringent and more diligent, if I can call it that.
So I guess what lobbyists in South Africa should be doing is if you've got GDPR compliance, you should get the stamp of POPIA and they should localize that instead of spending all that time recertifying. But great question, Ilse, especially with the looming date that's coming through. Back to you, Jacques.
Just to highlight again, from a HCX-based workload migration support, this is where we really allow customers the flexibility to move their workloads via the customer portal. A lot of the times we see customers want to fire up certain workloads into a Azure or a AWS, etc. And how do we manage those workloads from an ingress and egress perspective, managing the cost associated to those and making sure that we can do those migration sets that's currently in cloud, respective public, back onto on-prem, and then vice versa. We also provide the agility to move workloads to any host, cold or warm, etc., from a single point, and then making sure that we keep that continuity between apps and workloads up and running while we specifically do that. So just for the technical folk on the call, this is really just a high-level overview of how the multiple cluster support in a single rack looks. Basically, it allows customers to segment certain instances. Coming back to Willem's question, if there's specific workloads, you can isolate those through the software-defined data center that we do set up, and we can specifically set areas up for those respective customers. All segmentations of resources remain viewable in a single pane of glass, as mentioned. And here we can have a look at the actual scalability of these clusters, 8 clusters in a single rack. So from a footprint, data, cooling, and footprint perspective, very well condensed infrastructure. So let's have a look at certified to deliver data protection. Very big question currently in and around, how's my backup doing? How many times is my data backed up? And how secure is that? From a Dell Technologies perspective, this is really where we see certified data protection and disaster recovery with our stack of solutions to ensure all data is managed efficiently with a unified secondary storage strategy that we generally put in place with global deduplication and integration with existing data center processes. This is just to make sure that your data sets are secure, locked, and also air-gapped, specifically as we have seen the climb in cybersecurity over the time of the pandemic as well. So ensuring immutable security, again, from modern malware threats all the way to including ransomware and other data target efforts, that's really where we step up and we say, guys, let's consult with regards to backup strategies.
We've got another question from Tawa, which is on that slide. So we've installed all of your kit, your virtual data center in our Randburg data center. Everything's rocking and rolling. Manufacturing systems are running, and we have a natural disaster. How is your data center protected?
So that's a very interesting question and a very good question. And it plays all back to the operating model. So, that's where we see, where does your respective data sets reside? Is it on-prem? Is there multiple copy? Is it air-gapped? It all plays into your business's data operating model. Where are those, if we do sit with a natural disaster, for example, what caution have we taken to place data in the respective sets? Is it going to be locally on SA ground? Is it going to be in the public or private clouds? If so, how often do we back up those and how do we move those? So it all plays back into the operating model for data placement, respectively. So hopefully that answers the question.
I just want to add to that. So a couple of critical things that Jacques touched on there. There's first of all, your data and the resilience of that data being able to live across multiple data centers simultaneously. And a lot of the hypercloud providers, hyperclouds being your Microsoft, your Googles, et cetera, create geolocation so the data centers are in sync. So if a data center in the country is down, you've got full resilience to continue your business from another source within that cluster, call it that. But there's other considerations as well. In the event of a ransomware, for example, where if your data is exposed, then the replication exposes the ransomware across your entire data set or your cluster. And then the air gap that Jacques touched on becomes very important in terms of how do you have that additional set of data that is secure outside of your data center, call it that loosely in layman's terms. The geographical spread is very common in South Africa, and most of us in the school, I'm assuming, are from South Africa, is that our local data center providers, and I'm aware of that because we've got one of them in our business, is that we create a geographical distribution for our customers between our data centers. So KZN, Gauteng, and the Western Cape. So a customer can have their primary source in the Western Cape, for example, but it can decide a secondary source lives in KZN or in Gauteng, which creates that additional air gap or benefit of either natural disaster or malicious activity, whatever it might be.
But Tawe, if I summarize what both gentlemen have said, is treat your architect with kid gloves, give them drinks with little umbrellas, and make sure they understand your strategy so that your architecture is done correctly the first time.
Just in summary, IT operations can offload the burden of dealing with local infrastructure. I think that's one key aspect that we want to bring across today with data centers as a service. Secondly, IT security can apply security policies across environments from a single pane of glass. Thirdly, from a developer's perspective, this is where we can see and streamline the app building process, respectively, in the organization. So you don't have that respective shadow IT environment. And then, lastly, CXOs, but can reduce complexity and managing multiple cloud strategies under one umbrella. That concludes me, Daniel.
Marlon Germany has asked, how do we deal with long-term data backup and storage and the technology which is changing so quickly? Will it still be available in 7 years' time? And I'm not going to answer that for you. I could, but I'll let Feroz. What are you recommending to customers who are operating workloads in the cloud with regards to data?
I think the first step is for the customer to understand what they want to do and what they want to achieve. And then obviously architect that correctly so that it maps into their strategy, and technology needs to deliver onto that. So there's not always a quick fix of let me just throw technology on it. And that's where I think where things go wrong. When talking about your data storage for the longer term, then a tiered environment often helps with that. So that your organization has got their live data, their immediate access to secondary data, if an emergency, and a longer archive. So when you look at a data center strategy, and it's called data center strategy, but it could be called a cloud strategy or just a data strategy for that matter, you need to look at tiers of your data. And it's been touched on already by Marlon's question, is that where do you want to put that long-term data? Because you can take it outside your existing environment and put it into a long-term archive. And there's many of organizations offer that. I mean, Amazon offers that, for example, within Glacier, where we create a strategy to move data between the tiers. So that the data you may not, just for compliance, for example, and to keep it for 7 years, it sits in another environment where you really won't touch it till some auditor comes knocking on your door, say, can I see the data from 5 years ago, please? And then you go fetch it. And it's been dormant since then.
So I want to echo that. The tiered strategy is a very important strategy from a data retention perspective. You don't necessarily want all your hot data respectively sitting on your fastest tiers and your flash, etc. So there's different technologies and a lot, not just from a Dell perspective, but also in the multi-scalers, giving you that capability to offload to much higher density storage for long-term retentions. And those will still be available as we move into the near future.
What I wrote down, is this a tech discussion or a business decision? And I think that this agile team that comes together, it really bridges everywhere where we get those discussions regarding where the data is, how long do we store it, what are we doing with it. And I don't know if we hear enough about that, but perhaps that's something we can touch on in a different panel discussion, is just the role of these teams and the makeup of it. Jacques, you spoke quite a bit in the beginning about the makeup of the data center as a service. And then you spoke about democratized dev tools. So I'm going to ask Feroz to answer that. What is a democratized development tool? And why is that pertinent in a cloud discussion in a data center environment?
I think what Jacques was referring to is the fact that today organizations don't operate in a monolithic development environment any longer. In the old days, people used to develop applications sitting on their server locally, and it was really large applications, and those were built off one platform. And then everybody consume of that. The way the architectures have changed today is into a containerization-based model. That containerization model means it gives you agility, and agility is beyond just the ability to scale from a performance perspective, but it's a security stretch across them, and it's an instantaneous launch, if I can put it. So if you can think of it, it's instead of having one massive application, you have 1,000 minor applications that are all well integrated, securitized, etc. And when your business spikes on a Black Friday or whatever other big sale, for example, you can deploy another 10 times or 100 times of those. and stretch them and
Okay.
bring them back again.
Okay.
So just a modern way of architecting your application that's not tied to the hardware. I think that's the important
Okay.
part.
Excellent. So all of this tying together, if we've got this data center as a service that we've subscribed to, one of the things, one cloud fits all, is pretty much a risk to the organizations now. So we understand that there's going to be this hybrid environment. What is the key skill that our CIOs need to have when looking at the operation through the DC as a service?
We've seen siloed environments. You'll have a security expert, you'll have a database expert, you'll have a server expert. So all of those, and not to say that you'll have a generalist on the floor looking after all these sets. You'll actually bring out the best of those specific resources. So as you centralize and offer it as a service, the primary focus will not just necessarily be to have the lights on. The underlying, let's call it the commodity hardware, the patches and all those are taken care of. So the prime focus from a resource perspective to look after an environment will be those respective specialists. So it depends on, what's your business drive? What's the service you want to put out there? And what kind of focus from a skill perspective will be required to manage that environment? Yeah.
So the next gen leader needs to be versatile, flexible, and understand integration pretty much. Wilhelm said, Jacques, you didn't answer my question for his unique requirements. He wants to guarantee a secure connection at all times as they are setting up the God of all databases, DBI World New Super Internet. So I guess it is this data center as a service, can you guarantee? And your answer is probably smash some money at it and you can guarantee your connection, but I'll let you answer it.
So yes, it's all about the data. So understanding the data and what needs to be achieved. I do believe that there's a direct connection that can be made with those respective data sets. So let's say we take away the perimeter as such, and we don't isolate those respective workloads, put everything on the cloud, because that's in essence what it is. But at least I know that when I access O365 or Azure or AWS service, that's accessible to me. Am I looking at, do I have a direct connection to that platform? In essence, I do. And I think that is the same with your data center as a service. When you set up your security from that perspective to allow direct access for the public to that respective database, that is achievable. To be done in a secure manner, I think that's where, the consultative approach comes into play to say, well, how much security and authentication would I like my customers to get to those respective DBs or, databases as such? And if the answer is, well, none, then great. Let's go and make sure that we secure the back end to have that capability to allow direct access to that database or even application set. But I'm happy to even have a one-on-one with Wilhelm just to discuss and unpack a bit of the, landscape. How does your application work? How does your infrastructure currently set up, so that we can have a look at what's the best approach to allow your specific requirement, instead of, putting a DB on the internet, for example, unsecure and accessible.
So our poll was answered while you were chatting about the question, and the results are really interesting. I think it's such a South African view. And I want to hone in on the no at the bottom of question 2. Do you currently outsource any management of your data center? Nearly 70% of the folks are saying no, which speaks to how I understand South African folks. We like to own our problems. We like to look after them. But it also talks to 33% that are saying, these are your issues, make sure you can look after them. And my question for you, Feroz, is, are you seeing the same kind of weighting in your customers where they are asking for advice on tactical areas and point areas, or are they saying, take the whole thing and look after it?
So I think there's very few customers who actually say, take everything and manage it. Let's understand that. I think maybe it's trust. Maybe it's just wanting control and a comfort zone of knowing that we've got it. Maybe it's retaining staff, if for whatever reason. There's various reasons why. But what we're finding is that customers are selective in some ways and they will find areas that they are challenged in to resource or manage themselves and outsource that bit of it. So a very common area today is becoming more prevalent around the security space. Security has evolved so much over the last few years and will continue to evolve as these hacker incidences, ransomware incidences are on the incline. I mean, it's steeply rising to great heights. So especially the medium to smaller customers don't necessarily have the depth of skill to understand what to do to prevent that and manage that. And from there onwards, I think we're seeing a change and shift. But I think there's also maturity coming from customers longer term, the awareness of how do we automate more of this? How do we use tools? Jacques alluded to that. The ability for the system to better manage itself so that there isn't this dependency on manpower or people doing it manually. And then AI coming into the data center, which is a new evolution to a large extent, where things can be more automated from a performance perspective. And I think as customers delve into that, it's a preamble to the cloud, because the cloud is really letting go, right, to some extent anyway. But I think it's a maturity thing and it's a business requirement thing. Maybe there's a reason why they don't want to let go, but in general, most customers don't let go of everything.
I think also it's a trust thing. You know, trust is about, do I have faith you can do it? Have I seen it before? And that speaks to, one of South Africa's biggest problems, in my opinion, is that managers they don't manage. And this is typically the same thing. I think they can't afford to. The consequences are too big, which talks to question one. And 70% of the people are worried about management of their data center and the complexity that we're dealing with. Are you seeing the same thing, Jacques? Is it, with skills turnover, skills shortage, just the complexity, legacy, cloud, hybrid management of data centers? Do people know where to go to see one view of their data center?
Yeah, so definitely we see that increasing. But we also, coming back to the trust thing, a lot of the times the customer has either been on their journey into the cloud and have reversed engineered that back onto prem, and they've built the skill purely on the capability of that and that experience. And they want to maintain and sustain that skill level, right? Because it's my data. I'm not necessarily, from a customer point of view, doing the same thing that my competition is doing. I'm doing it better. And I'm seeing that I want to retain the staff that's enabling me to kind of like continue that innovation, that consistency, keeping the lights on, etc. So yes, the outsourcing part, I think in the SA term is a very broad question, but how much do you want to give over, allow, and provide services to? And a lot of the times we see that some of those SLAs don't necessarily get met at a lot of times. So customers are reversing a bit and saying, well, guys, hold on, I'd rather employ because I know exactly I've got control of it. So I think it's a control answer more than just a trust as well.
So I wrote something down here while you were talking, and I understand and I feel customers in SA are moving to cloud and are becoming more and more familiar with it from an applications perspective. Are you seeing customers moving workloads to the cloud data centers? Are you seeing more of an uptick for those? Are your customers saying, listen, don't need hardware on-prem, I want to move it to cloud, and this is why?
Interesting question, that one, because everybody thinks the data center is dead, and that is so far from true, because I think it's a case of putting the right tool in place for the right job. And customers are definitely moving workloads into the cloud. It's a given and it's a necessity. The first thing that went a couple of years ago is your Exchange server, for example, Toast 365, 100% makes sense. The functionality is better, the performance is better, etc., etc. But no customer has come and said, I'm turning this thing off. I want everything to live there. And there's various reasons for that, right? And we can unpack those reasons. But I think the case of requirement is what fits where. What cloud serves me better in my business? And that is what drives this hybrid cloud or multi-cloud conversation. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. So customer can't say, I'm going to turn this off and get turned on there. They've got to decide that this particular application, and Salesforce is an example, is best set with Salesforce, and as a provider, as a SaaS. Exchange, no longer on-prem. It sits with Toast 365 because that makes sense, and it ties back into the other components that Microsoft presents as a value. There are components that customers need on-premise still, which is dependent on performance or price performance. Performance meaning just core raw IOs, if I can use that term, or the cost associated with getting that performance. Now, most hyperscalers charge a cost for extracting data out of the cloud. And if you're consuming a lot of data out of your data center or your server environment, then that's going to catch you. And that's where customers find it challenging. I think the one common mistake organizations make is that the first question that they think is the cloud cheaper? And it's often not an IT conversation. It's the financial director who's decided we should look at cloud because it's cheaper. And that is probably not the right way to go about it.
Another question I wrote is, what is the typical use case for this out-of-the-box DC solution? Because we're having these discussions, not that deep pockets at the moment because sales numbers are under pressure. When does DC as a service come into play versus just knuckling down and fighting through until next year?
I think a good starting point is now. I think a lot of businesses are under pressure. A lot of businesses see, for example, the public cloud as the answer, and it may be, depending on your business and the workloads. But data centers as a service can be consumed, and I think that's a very interesting concept to get to grasp. You don't have to pull out the old checkbook or bring all the plastic to swipe and get this going. There's different consumption models that can be applied. There's sizing that's specifically done for your respective business. So it's not, well, this is the data center as a service, this is the one size fits all, and you consume as you go along. Okay. We engage and we consult. It's all about the data, understanding your business, understanding the data sets, etc. Then sizing and building according to that. And once that's on, then you've got the capability to consume it as a service. And there's different models for that. There's rent to own, normal flex on demand models whereby you utilize what you require and only pay for what you use. So it's very, very flexible in that sense. What I do see, and to get back to the original question, is when is the right time and when do we enable it? I think before committing necessarily to lift and shift, let this be a platform to get you into that process, into that operating model. To say, okay, guys, I'm not going to be burnt with moving one workload into public and needing to reverse that out because of the price tag at the end of the day, but rather do it, in the operating model as you move during your transformation journey to digitalization.
I just wanted to continue on that. Actually, is that cloud's a journey, right? Let's just understand that it's not it's not a lift and drop. There we go. It's a process. It's an evolution. It's a readiness from a culture perspective, a technology perspective, security perspective, governance, all that kind of stuff. Having said that, I don't think data center as a service implies cloud. And I think that is Jacques' message, is that there is a preamble to the cloud. And that is, how do you ready yourself for that journey? And data center as a service is part of that conversation. So it could be a private cloud. It could be a cloud that's built inside your data center, but operates as a cloud. So there's so many ways to have this discussion. It could be a financial discussion as opposed to a technology discussion. So lots of ways.
I like that, but you're still not getting away from my question. All things being equal, you've got access to the customer. We understand their roadmap, what's going on. What's your time frame to get the environment up and running for this data center as a service? Feroz, what are you seeing? Not what Jacques saying from a Dell sell perspective, because you are sitting in front of the customer and getting beaten by it.
So if a customer gave us their checkbook and said, make this happen, I think within 6 to 8 weeks, because there's architectural designs, kit requirements, deliveries through customs, etc. I'd be a little bit nervous for sub 6 weeks, even though we've pulled some miracles. But essentially 8 weeks is probably a good timeline to finalize architectures and designs criteria.
Wow, that's quite quick. Okay, Jacques, you can answer now.
So yes, I agree. 4 to 6 weeks is generally the turnaround time, but at some time with the customer, we do have very well set out architectural design and frameworks that we take our customers through. In that being said, we do understand, what's not just the current requirement, but also the 6 to 12 months requirement from that perspective. But to get it up and running, to get it in the data center, a good 4 to 6 weeks, then you would primarily have your own data center as a service.
Wow, that's quite quick. Exiting from this, what happens for a customer? You said we can span it up for a project and expansion, a Black Friday kind of idea? How deep do your hooks go?
So that all depends on the model that's selected from a Dell perspective, but also from our partners' perspective. There's different financing models that's accommodating the customers out there. A lot of customers still believe in CapEx, which is fair in today's age. Some do believe in OpEx, and in that case, there's different sets that we do offer. From a Dell perspective, and you'll see that quite in the media, is that we are launching a full-blown Project Apex coming to SA shores as soon as Q1, Q2 next year. So let's say around about June, July on SA ground, where that pure consumption model is locally in South Africa as well. Up until then, we've got what we call Dell Financial Services that can work and utilize consumption models on step models over respective years. And when those are either consumed or cancelled, then there's basically the financial set that we generally take our customers through.
But we could look at a pop-up DC for a 3-month campaign that we're looking at a project for as if you were supporting a local expansion into the Eastern Cape, 3-month, kick it out there. We could get something like that up and running as well. That's a viable option.
I think the kind of architectures we're talking about are not typically your 3-month windows, right? Because typically that talks more to a cloud requirement. I've got nothing, I need it for 3 months, and I don't need it after that. If it's an expansion for 3 months, then there's various ways of architecting that, because it could be a hybrid architecture, it could be a local infrastructure provider, hybrid architecture, or an expansion on the on-prem architecture, depending what's needed. I don't think that question has got a simple answer. But if it's a kind of
It was an unfair question. I'm actually going to pause it there because that is a discussion on its own from an architecture perspective. I would like to ask, Feroz, I'm going to start with you. As we're entering November, December, decisions people are thinking about 2021, what would you say is the focus that you would give or your customers are giving for 2021, first half of 2021 calendar? Where would you be focusing?
Without a doubt, security. Right, without a doubt. I think that's the number one concern for everybody. It is the reality of things that the risks are increasing, and that whatever you did last month and last 6 months and a year ago is probably not going to work for the next 6 months coming. So there needs to be a vision in terms of a model that supports security from various levels, including POPI. The POPI question came up earlier, including POPI from a data integrity point of view, from security breach point of view, from an access point of view. So I think whatever you do in your business from a data center perspective, don't forget about the security threat that's involved. Yeah.
Jacques?
Yeah, I want to echo that by saying definitely security. However, I think primary focus should be on your data. So we're in the data era as we stand today, right? We're seeing the increase of data just growing by the second. And I think it's taking that data and capitalizing on it. So looking at innovation, how to utilize your data that you have in your business and use that to your advantage. Create those data sets, mine that data, and you'll be amazed on what additional innovation comes out of that respective data. Use that to the advantage. At the same time, making sure that it's secure.
Excellent. So I read that article that data is the new oil, and the subline is that crude is not as valuable as refined. And I think that our role as partners and service providers is actually to show customers how to refine the data and the tools that they can use to refine it. And data center as a service can take away some of the complexity from what I've understood, as well as that mythical single pane of glass that we can look across our environments. I don't think we've touched on that sufficiently, because one of the benefits I saw was just the data that's coming out that Dell and Feroz yourself are promising from First Technology to customers. So it's worthwhile having a look. My wrap up to customers is cloud is definitely a buyer's market at the moment. I would go and have a look around. There's some very interesting offers and options that are on the table. And data center as a service is talking around the cloud as a service as something which should have been there a couple of years ago, but is here now and really worth the investigation. I just want to thank you, Jacques and Feroz, for putting up with questions you hadn't prepped for our panelists, for our attendees, for you sending through some interesting questions as well, and definitely to TechCentral for allowing me to facilitate. Thank you very much.